Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Moderating today's episode is Ali Naithani.
Welcome to the show. We're so glad you're with us today. We're going to talk about something that has gotten, unfortunately, a lot of news and a lot of notoriety over the last, probably, I would guess, 5 to 10 years, and that's identity theft. So before we begin, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my co-hosts, and they are Nadia Jordana. Hi, Nadia.
Hi, happy to be here with you guys today.
Awesome to see you. And Janita Flowers.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, great. And Uma Junga.
Hi, Ali. It's
Hello.
great to be here as usual.
Awesome. Well, as I said earlier, we're going to talk about identity theft, something that has unfortunately been a topic in the news lately, and something I think a lot of people need to learn more about.
Right,
and we need to expose more. So I am so excited to introduce our guest today. Her name is Beth Lasseter. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you very much.
And you are an independent associate with ID Shield.
That is correct.
All right.
Okay, so identification theft, like Ali has mentioned, it's like we have been hearing about that in the news and everywhere. It's in different forms too. So what really is identification theft? So if you can really describe it so viewers can understand what really it's about.
Yep. So what identity theft is defined is the fraudulent use of your personal information, and that could be used in order to commit theft, commit fraud. Some of the different types of ID theft that we see involve tax fraud. It can involve use of your credit card. It can be, use of your social security number. There are a lot of different ways that it happens, and I think it's really important for people to understand those different ways so that they can be, more aware of it.
So we know that identity theft is something that more and more people have to be aware of or become aware of, unfortunately, because that's happened to them. Someone's taken their identity. How long or when do you discover that your identity has been stolen? I mean, is it usually right away? If it were, your social security number and someone tapped into your bank accounts, does your bank let you know? Like, how does someone really know they've been impacted without a lot of time going by and a lot of damage happening?
Yep, that's a great question. Normally, people will find out when something comes in the mail. It could be a letter that, for example, you all probably shop at Target, and when the Target breach happened, if your credit card was one of the ones that was used, you might have gotten a letter in the mail indicating that your card was breached and your bank or credit union has to replace the card. Other ways you can find out, if you check your credit score regularly, you might see that there is a major change there. You might also find out, I hate to say it, but we've had people find out when they've been pulled over for something very simple, like failing to use, their turn signal, and when their driver's license is run by the police officer, suddenly the officer says, oh, you have a fraud warrant out for your arrest. You're going to jail. That actually did happen to one of our clients, and it was because of an identity theft case that had to do with her eBay account being hacked. So those are usually the ways, oftentimes if people aren't paying attention, it comes in a sort of non-expected way. But there are a lot of things that people can do to be sort of on the front end and be ready for it when it comes.
Does it usually happen, we hear about people where someone takes their identity, gets enough information that they literally become you, maybe halfway around the world or in another city? Is that very frequent? That's what we think of a lot of time when we think that someone stole my identity. Where does that fit in, and what really happens?
Well, that's a great question, because that kind of identity theft, which is called character and criminal identity theft, is a smaller portion of identity theft. However, when it does happen, it's pretty scary, and I'll give you an example. Mary Mitchell, who's a columnist with the Chicago Sun-Times, received a letter in the mail indicating that she had just purchased a brand new Dodge Caravan at a dealership she'd never set foot in, and as it turns out, when she spoke to the general manager, somebody had come in posing as her granddaughter and said, Grandma wants to co-sign for the loan. And they got so far as one of their sales agents going with the fake granddaughter to Mary Mitchell's house in order to have her sign the documents, and the granddaughter said, oh, my grandma's not here, she's at church. And they went down to a church about 3 blocks away, and a lady coming out posing as Mary Mitchell signed the documents without ID. Now, the next business day, when they didn't actually get an ID, they knew something was up. But it's the kind of thing that you just think, how did somebody learn all that information? But if you think about social media and all the different places that we're very free with our information, somebody can be paying attention to that to impersonate you.
That's what I was wondering. How do they even know, okay, we can fool this person? You know, see, I was a victim too, like 4 weeks back. Somebody called, I got a 911 number in my phone call, and I thought it was from police, and they said, you didn't pay the tax returns, we are from IRS, so we are going to come and arrest you if you don't pay. I was like, see, I was in work, so you won't even think outside the box is some. Honestly, when I think afterwards, I felt like I was so stupid, but at that time, I was so vulnerable. You know, I was so scared to death, like, oh my God, I was going to arrest me. I just asked them. They made me buy iPhone gift cards, music cards for like, you won't believe me, I lost, including credit cards, amount like $15,500 in one day.
Oh my gosh.
That week was a disaster.
Yeah, and that, you bring up an excellent point. There is a major scam right now involving phone calls from the IRS, and I've received them too. One thing I want to tell you is the IRS will never call you. They will notify you by mail. But people will receive those phone calls, and they'll be told that they need to call a certain number in order to pay the back taxes, whatever's owed. I even had a client who received a phone call from Ramsey County court system indicating that a lawsuit had been filed against her, and that she needed to call the 651 phone number in order to make an answer for the lawsuit. And she actually was very proactive. She called our fraud investigators first, and they ran a check on the phone number. Turns out that 651 number originates in India, and had she called it, it would have been able to, they would have been able to hack into her phone and get the information. So it can come at the strangest, in the strangest ways. And what I normally tell people is, you really need to be stingy with your personal information. Turn the question around. If you're asked for data, you know, ask, well, I'd like to look into this further. What number can I call you back at? You know, do your research and find out, because a lot of times those things are fraudulent. But if it's IRS, you know it's fraudulent. They're never going to call you.
Yeah, I know my example, I just want to say, I saw her the next day, and you know, I think when people hear this story, they think, oh, that won't happen, but they really, I think, really traumatized you. And I think they, you know, I just want to throw out there that this really can really take people, and I think you know, you were really you felt very threatened in the moment, and they're very good at what they do. I just want to put that out there. But to remember, I think, as you were saying too, you have the power. You always remember, if you're put in that situation, especially over the phone, you have the power in that moment.
Right. Absolutely. You have the ability to say, no, I'm not going to provide you with my social security number. No, I'm not going to give you my credit card information. And I'd say too that even, you know, if you think about all the places where your data is stored, at your doctor's office, your dental office, you know, a lot of times they don't have to have your social security number. They don't have to have some of that data. You should always ask, why do you need this? What will you use it for? I had a situation with Comcast. They wanted to have my social security number, and I said no. And they said, well, it's, you know, for tracking purposes and so on. And I said, okay, well, here's the deal I'll make with you. How about the last 4 digits? They said that would be sufficient. Okay, so that's something that you can think of. But it's always good to ask questions and never assume that everything is as it should be.
But in my case, the thing is, they didn't ask for social security number. That's why I didn't get the doubt at all. Like, you know, they just telling me, like, you know, since you have a black mark in your record now, we have to erase it through, like, not showing your name or anything. We just need the cards, so that, you know, in the form of cards, music cards, we'll pay off your, you know, get the black mark off your, you know, it's a different way. I never heard of that before. So that's why I didn't know, they didn't ask me to give the check, or they didn't ask me to give the money to them directly. So they asked me the form of music cards, which I didn't get it at the time. Like, why do they even need an Apple Music phone cards. I don't know what do they do with that?
I think when that question comes in the back of your mind, this seems a little odd. That's one of the red flags, even if you can't figure it out.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, in this day and age, unfortunately, you know, you don't always have to get a phone call or something in the mail to be a victim of identity theft. You could be, you know, paying cash for everything and, you know, live off the grid and all that kind of stuff. But there are, in America, 34 billion public records. And all of our data is stored in so many different places that one of the threats is that we have no control over who might get access to those databases. I just have been dealing with a couple of clients whose company was actually breached, and the way it happened was somebody posing as the CEO asked the HR department to upload W-4 data on all the 10,000 employees. And somebody bought the scam and uploaded the data, and it went to a third party. And so, you know, in that case, of course, now there's a class action lawsuit brewing against that company, but those employees had no control over that. So really, I think it's important for people to just be on their guard constantly. Like you're saying, if something seems strange, it probably is. Always assume that it is, and then be prepared to ask questions. And when I was a teacher, I would always tell my students, TTQA, turn the question around. Turn it on the person asking for the information.
I think in Uma's case, and what happens a lot of times is they figure how to trigger whatever that trigger point is, and then you're operating on fear and adrenaline, and then when you're operating on fear and adrenaline, you're not able to think proactively. So normally I wouldn't do this, or I wouldn't give this information, but now I've panicked, so now I just want to get this off. I feel like whatever the feelings are from whatever they've triggered with the questions. So now I just want to protect. I just want it to go away. And then when you get away from the call and you calm down a little bit, now you're able to think rational, like, oh my gosh, like how did they get me? So it can happen to anyone. So that being said, Beth, are there some, you know, 3, 4, 5 steps or things that people can think about or be aware of, just so that it's sort of top of mind, or things they can do just to sort of have a little bit of safeguarding or security when it comes to their information?
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the first things that's important to do is, again, remember, be stingy with that personal information. One of the things you can do is you can call your banks and credit card companies and ask them to demand ID if somebody is presenting your card, and that could be you. You can also check to make sure that your banks and even some of the social media sites, I believe there's a way to turn on something called 2 or 3-step verification, where rather than just one, you know, one PIN number or whatever, so there are 2 or 3 questions you have to answer in order to get in. That helps a lot. I think that what I always tell people too is, you know, identity theft, because it's such a growing problem, right now in America, about 35% of companies offer some kind of a benefit to their employees. And that number is expected to grow to 70% of companies by 2018, which is not far away. So I recommend that people take a look at your benefits package at your employer. It may be that there is some kind of an identity safeguard that's available through your employer, and if that's the case, you should take advantage of that. You can also go to the FTC. They do have a document called Taking Charge, and this is a great resource. It's about 60 pages long, but it's free. You can get it from the FTC. That's the Federal Trade Commission. And it walks you through different scenarios. It walks you through different things you can do proactively and also
Things that you can
afterwards.
do as just a basic person then?
Basic person, and then if something does happen, like your situation, okay, now what do I do now? You know, if something happens to you, you should definitely contact the police department and file a complaint. You know, by that time, it's usually hard to find the perpetrator. There's less than a 5% prosecution rate for identity theft, unfortunately, but that's because, you know, it's so underhanded. It's so, you know, in the shadows, so to speak. But yeah, you can definitely get some resources from FTC.
Beth, you also said the social media aspect, so I just wanted to touch on that. not. We innocently all post things on Facebook and talk about our lives. Tell us about how that could affect us with identity theft.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, one of the 3 largest data breaches in 2015 was Anthem Health. They're the second largest provider of health insurance. Blue Cross Blue Shield uses Anthem in the Southeast. And that part of that identity theft breach involves somebody using LinkedIn for information. So I would recommend that on social media you're very selective about what you post. Maybe limit the personal information. There are ways that you can actually limit who you share information with, and you can make your page private instead of public. But it is something that, there are no real safeguards in social media. LinkedIn has said we have no way to vet who it is that's applying for accounts, same with Facebook. So it's really on us. We have to be proactive, we have to be careful. Not too much personal information. Yep.
Well, with the internet, the www really stands for the Wild Wild West, because it's uncharted territory. And the more where they're coming out with, all these live feeds and ways to just upload information instantaneously, it is now just an extension of our life. So people safeguarding information, unfortunately, is probably not what's going to be the most realistic thing that happens, because, like I said, it's just like your third arm, because now people are videotaping and live shooting everything. Like, look, and I'm getting my nails done, and they're like, we're walking through them at the salon getting their nails done. I mean, it's everything. So I don't know what kinds of things the internet or the social media platforms will do to continue to try to safeguard, but I think after a while it's going to be just a bunch of, I don't know, everything. Nothing's private anymore. And
yeah, that's the tricky thing about it, is that it's very difficult to, no one's going to be able to prevent 100% of the data breaches. Because like we said, there's so much that's out of your control.
And children, our kids, was that what you were going to ask? There's some things we need to know for our kids.
Absolutely, yep. So with kids' identities, this is a growing area that's very concerning. It's up probably between 300 and 400%, because nobody's paying attention to kids. I mean, we're having a hard enough time, keeping track of our own stuff, right? One of my clients had taken her 17-year-old son in to get his first bank account. He got his first job, and when they ran his Social Security number, he had over a 10-page credit report. And the parents had no idea. Well, the single mom, had no idea. Well, our fraud investigators went back to see if they could find the breach, and it turned out that he had to go back 14 years. When the baby's parents divorced when he was 3, Dad had financial problems and sold the baby Social for $50. Okay, and the man who bought it ended up in jail not too long after that, but he had sold it to multiple other people. So there is a way for you to monitor your kids' credit and to monitor their Social Security numbers. But the main thing is, again, it's that whole preventative piece. If you're going through any kind of life change, okay, whether that is a divorce or whether that is moving to a different state, this is another area of identity theft that's growing. And when people move, you just have to be very cautious about what data you are sharing with the moving company, and just being aware and proactive and watching, so that what's happened with the kids, then it can be fairly quick to fix it, just because there's usually not a lot that you have to do. But children should not have a credit report, okay? They shouldn't. If they do, unless you've given them a credit card and you're ready to let them go in the world. But that is definitely something. And the FTC has a separate document about safeguarding your children's IDs. So that's another one I recommend people go to the FTC. FTC.gov is the website, and there's a lot of great information there for people.
Wonderful. That's the Federal Trade Commission.
Federal Trade Commission, yep, and they've been tracking ID theft statistics since 2000 It is the #1 consumer complaint and has been for 16 years in a row.
And
So
Beth,
they've
now,
got lots.
is there a way for people to get in touch with you? You're a consultant, or you help people talk through some of these things. Is there a way for people to contact you for more information?
Yep, there is. So I have my own website, BethLasseter.com. Also, if people go to the corporate site, IDShield.com, you can actually search for me. I'm happy to help people, and I work with groups of employees in the employee benefits sphere too. And I can tell you guys, there's a lot of people are very concerned about this. There's a real need for people to understand to be on their guard with regard to their personal information.
All right, Beth, wow, what a helpful and informative session today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Joining
Happy to
us.
do it.
And we're going to move into our next segment here, where we have, in my hand, I have a surprise question. This is from our director, Mike Rosberg. None of us know what this question is. And Beth, you're going to stay with us as we
I will. I'd
look
be
into
happy
this
to.
topic. Okay, here we go, everybody. So here it is. How much of your personal identity is just you? And how much of it depends on the time and place in which you live? If someone put you into a transporter that took you to a completely different time and place, would you consider that to be a case of identity theft?
That sounds like a play on words.
I think so.
I wonder if that time and place would be in the future or in the past, or would that make much difference? It would be very interesting, and how far in the past or the future.
You know, it makes me think of, because I often use this example, you know, everybody's probably familiar with Charles Dickens' story of Oliver Twist. And he's a young orphan who ends up going into London and taking up with a group of pickpockets, right? The Artful Dodger and Fagin, the evil Fagin. And I use this example because, you know, the pickpockets, well, they had it pretty easy. All you had to do was be good at lifting someone's wallet out of a pocket. And usually there was cash there, and that's what you would use. Or you would take the, you know, the watch and chain out and maybe go sell that. You know, it's different. The Artful Dodger of today just can sit in his chair in front of the computer and get whatever he needs that way. So, so yeah, the time travel thing with regard to identity theft, it makes me instantly think of the Artful Dodger.
That's a good
You know, when I hear that, it just kind of makes me think sort of out of the box a little bit, because when we say personal identity, often we think of your social security card, your driver's license, all the documentation that tracks you. But then when I hear this question, it kind of makes me think about personal identity as to who you are at your core. But we never think of that. We always think of the documentation. So if it's documentation, it's going to be the same wherever we go. But if we're thinking about who we are intrinsically, you know, just kind of within ourselves, well, yeah, then it can be impacted by time, place, location, you know, where we are, when we are there. So I think it depends on how we look at what our personal identity is.
But of course, if your passport is representing you, right?
Right.
If you don't have the identity, is gone.
Right.
Let's say you go too far in the past, then there would be no passport, and your documentation certainly wouldn't even be in rudimentary form. I think being in a different time or place, future or present, would make a big difference on who you are, at least, like you say, on paper.
But what an interesting thought, as you've so eloquently, I might say, just focus that down for us. I think that's absolutely right. It is about the core of who you are, and if you are put into another place, how does that change things? And wow, back in time, would you know, would my name, me, would I still act the same, represent the same? Those are some of the questions that are coming to my mind.
Definitely.
I often think about that too. You know, you just think about, what would I be like if I was my ancestor who lived a couple hundred years ago, but I'm me? You know, how would I react to different situations? What would I do? How would I be viewed by others? You know, what's my identity with regard to how other people see me? I don't know why, but I just thought of my husband had to do a family history in college, and he, in the course of going back over the family documents, discovered that he had a probably great-great-great-grandmother who, there was a story about her standing on the roof of their house in Kentucky, 9 months pregnant, shooting at Indians. So it's just, okay, well, I guess we had some pioneer women in the back, and I think, okay, well, think about, you know, how we want to protect our children and what we would do to do that. We would probably, you know, go to any length to protect them. But it is interesting to think about, what would you do if you, you know, in different circumstances, how would you view the threats out there in the world as opposed to the way we look at them now?
Knowing what you know, especially if you were in another time and place and still have the knowledge of yourself in this time and place, yeah, that might make a difference as to who you are and how you might act. Whereas if your memory were wiped, we could do a TV show on that. We could write this script and then be in this other time and place. You'd be a different person again.
Yeah. Well, even as a woman, right, with women's rights and thinking about how far, you know, how much we've advanced, how would we fit back in time?
Well, because a lot of our identity is also tied into our culture.
Exactly.
Because
the crime rates, it might not be the same like we have right now. So it just definitely depends on the culture. Culture definitely impacts a lot.
I mean, it impacts, you know, our role as women and men and children and elders. So in this country, you know, where you can be anything and anyone at any time, but maybe in some cultures where there's definitely a structure of how, you know, children are to act and how women are to act and how men are to act and the role of elders, our identity will change because it's completely tied into the culture that we live in, especially if it's your pride. Like if you really take pride in your culture and you think it's just an extension of who you are, you will definitely morph or conform to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was thinking too, you know, I don't know if you all have ever had this desire, but don't you sometimes wish you could take everything that makes you who you are today and go back and, you know, deal with that troublesome teenage boyfriend, or, you know, just, I'd like to go back and take my identity right now and use it to maybe make a few better choices, maybe tell off a few people that I was afraid to tell off, and but you can't do, I mean, everything that came before had to be part of what forms your identity right now. Your culture, your choices, your family, your faith, all of it, you know, makes you who you are. So that identity is, it's pretty interesting.
So
it's like
that,
a kaleidoscope.
Yeah, that emotional identity is then, and I think I agree with what you're saying, that's more who you are than the paperwork identity, that emotional identity, because it would really be great to do those things, but then how would that change you?
Yeah. Well, you just have to watch Back to the Future to see how that, right? You can't do too much or you're going to alter the future too much. So fortunately, we can't time travel. That's probably a good thing.
Right.
Well, and you think about all of the little terms or tests that we take to help us, you know, sort of articulate our identity. So like if I'm an extrovert or if I'm an introvert, like we take pride in those titles and we sort of conform to those, okay, now if this is an extrovert, how do extrovert, and yes, that's who you are at your core, but you're always looking at some of those things. So I think it really has a lot to depend on, you know, where we are and that time we're living in it. And I think it all goes into shaping how we view ourselves, and then we take on that as our identity. And then if we want to catfish people, then we take on someone else's identity.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting to think about that with regard to, you know, just the way you speak to people. You know, words have real power, and if you say something to somebody that they take on. I mean, I was just thinking of a colleague of mine who, when he was a kid, was told, well, you kind of remind me of a janitor at a school. You know, that's kind of what, and he struggled with that for a long time. You know, he thought, okay, well, that's maybe as much as I can do. But, you know, sometimes you have to actually form a new identity for yourself by busting out of some of those molds that are given to you.
And in the tone of the way the person said it, where someone could have said that in a very uplifting way, and he would have thought, yeah, I am really good at fixing things. I could be that. It's what an influence, just the way it's said to the person, might affect their identity.
Right,
Absolutely.
Well, wow, what an interesting question we got.
That was great.
That was wonderful. Yeah. Well, Beth, thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great to talk with you.
And of all of you, it's always a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, we thank you for being with us today on It's a Woman's World, and we hope to see you next time.